Hello everybody, Luis here, and let's talk C#. We talked about classes and defined that classes represent things, everything a system cares about. But what does that mean exactly? To answer that question, we have to understand one thing. Computer systems exist to enforce business processes. Sometimes internal processes that have to be enforced within the company or department. In this scenario, employees will use the application so that they can be more efficient, and at the same time, the application will ensure all internal guidelines are being observed. Other times, systems can enforce external business processes. An e-commerce platform, for example, uses their website to enforce the process their customers have to go through in order to make a purchase. Regardless, the idea is that the goal of a software is to help users achieve a goal. In order to achieve that goal, the system must be able to manipulate virtual objects that represent things that exist in real life. For example, a car rental application needs to help users in renting cars. In order to do that, each car physically located at the patio must have a virtual representation in the system. That's just how computer systems work. When a customer needs to rent a car, the operator will check the system to see if there's anything available. The virtual objects that exist in the application contain information that informs the user about availability and rates, for example, so that they can rent those cars out to their clients. So the real question is, how do you create virtual cars inside the system? And the answer is, your program needs to define classes so that the application knows how to create them. That is exactly what classes do. They're blueprints that teach the system how to create virtual objects. So how do you define a class? If you're using Visual Studio, which you probably should, especially if you're a beginner in computer programming, it's really simple. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'll create a new folder inside my solution to put my classes in. Now, this step is actually optional. You're not technically obligated to do it, but hey, we're software engineers and engineers are very obsessed with their work and organization. So I'll go ahead and right-click my solution, go to New Folder, and I'll name my folder Models. Why models? Because that's exactly what engineers do. We create models that represent things in real life. In engineering, models can be mathematical models, mechanical models, electrical models. For us in software engineering, our models are classes that define things that our system cares about. Now that I have my folder, I'll right-click on it and add a new class. I'm gonna name the new class Person. This class is gonna be a virtual model that represents people in real life. Now, later on, these people in my system might be customers, they might be employees, but we'll get there. Just bear with me for now. I'll just go ahead and create this. And there you have it. We've created your first C# class. That was easy, right? Now, here's a side note. The very first thing you have to do when you create a new class is you want to make it public. We'll talk about the public access modifier in a minute. Now, of course, the class is not complete. Classes are used to represent things, and we know that technically they encapsulate information and functionality. So let's talk about information. In order for an object to be able to store information, it needs attributes. So in this example, I have a class Person, and what are some attributes that people have? Well, people have a first name, people have a last name, and people have a date of birth. These are things that all people have. So how do we define these attributes in our program? In C#, we do that by creating properties. Here's the property syntax. I'll start with the first name, so public string first name get set. So what do these things mean? Let's take a look. Public means I want this property to be accessible by everyone from the external world. By the way, by external, I mean outside of this class. Same goes for the public keyword I added at the top to the class definition. In that case, that means I want my class to be available across the entire application. Next, we have a string. That is my property's data type. This property is here to store a first name, and names are, most of the times on planet Earth, strings. Finally, we have the property name. A quick side note here. Remember how we can create arrays in C# and arrays have this property called length that you can use when defining loops and whatnot? Well, yeah. So first name is the same thing. That's an attribute that my objects will have. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, don't worry, just bear with me for now. But if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say arrays or loops, you should really pause this video and go watch my other videos on arrays and loops. Really, those things are the basic building blocks of what we're gonna do from now on. Last but not least, I have these things here, get and set. What are they? Well, they are vital parts of my property. They define that programmers are allowed to retrieve values from it, get, as well as assign values to it, set. And we're done. Now let me create the other properties there. I'll create a last name and a date of birth. By the way, in case you're not familiar with this, datetime is a data type that can be used to store, well, dates and times. Now, this time, I think we're done, and this is really the simplest way to define a class. Alright, now we have our class. Awesome, what happens now? How do we use this to create people in our application? That's easy. What we're gonna have to do here is, we'll go back to the program class. Wait, what did I just say? Program class? Yes, exactly. Program is a class. We've been working with classes since day one. That's mind-blowing, huh? Now, in my main method here, I'll declare a person object. How do we do that? The same way we used to declare all the other local variables or strings, ints, or doubles. That's always the same syntax. So we'll do person, me, equals, new person. At this point, you're gonna see an error message, and that's because the program class doesn't know what a person is. That's when that public modifier kicks in. Because my class is public, other classes of my program can see it, and if I tell them where to look, they'll be able to find it. You can hover your mouse over this error until you see this little lamp here. Then when you click on it, and we're looking here for the first option in this menu, effectively what it did was it added a using statement to the top of the file. That tells the program class that my person class can be found in this location. Now, what is this location? That's a namespace. See how the program class is in the namespace OOP101? Yeah, so if I go back to my person class, I can see that is actually in a different location, a different namespace. That is why they can't see each other. Hence why I have to let my program class know where to look for person. And there we have it. We have our first person. The process of creating an object is called instantiation, and we have just instantiated the person class. Right now, however, it's just a blank object. It's empty. It doesn't contain any information about anything. So let's change that. Remember how we define our properties? Yeah, so let's initialize them now. How do you initialize a property? The same way we used to initialize other objects. What I can do here is me dot first name equals Luis, semicolon, next line, me dot last name equals Parente. Note how I'm using double quotes on those values. Remember why I have to do that? Yeah, exactly, because those are strings and I have defined those properties as strings. Finally, I'll initialize my date of birth. me.date of birth equals new date time. We're gonna have to pass in some parameters here in this constructor now, so 1985 0715. Cool, right? And there we have it. That's our very first person object. We made it. Now we have this object here and we can Well, we can do whatever our system needs us to do, but you may have heard a new word there, didn't you? When I said constructor? Yeah, nice catch. Constructors are important, but we'll talk about them later. For now, let's just keep this simple and focus on what we learned today. So let's do a quick recap. In this video, we learned what a class is and how we can create one in C#. We also defined properties using a couple of different data types. And finally, we learned what instantiation is and created our first person object. That's pretty cool, huh? Well, I think it's cool. Anyways, on that note, that's it for me, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!